Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Everyone in this chamber, indeed everyone in this entire country, knows that they have a personal interest in the health of our environment. This isn't just about the environment. Of course, good environmental policy is good economic policy. It's about sustainability, and we must ensure that we have a sustainable economy, that we acknowledge that we do live in a carbon-constrained future and prepare ourselves for that future. We should always strive to be ahead of the curve, to be alert to global environmental issues and at all times, to give the environment the benefit of the doubt. This is also good economic policy. It's called fundamental risk management. And that's where climate change, of all issues in which this parliament will consider over this year and years to come, needs to be considered. Indeed, Australia, as the driest continent on the planet, means that we have an extra responsibility. We know what the risks of inaction are, and if we are doing our job as legislators, we should heed expert advice from the scientists and act upon it. And indeed, on the issue of climate change, I don't think there is any doubt about the need for action. There is no doubt that human activity is contributing to changes in the environment. I don't want to re-prosecute that case for action today, because I think that I will leave it to the scientists who have put forward through the various forums, be it the CSIRO in Australia or be it through the scientists involved in the IPCC, have put the facts on the table. We must act, and we know through economic analysis in reports such as that produced in the Stern report in the United Kingdom, or indeed the work that Peter Shergold did here in Australia, that the earlier we act, the cheaper the cost of action is. The alternative that's been put forward by the previous speaker and those on the coalition benches, the so-called direct action plan, planting trees and storing carbon in the soil, is inadequate to address the problem. It's a band-aid on a bullet wound. I'm all for planting more trees and for soil sequestration and any other type of mitigating action that can be taken to reduce carbon emissions. But based upon what the scientists are telling us, it simply won't be enough. That's why I support a market-based solution. That used to be a consensus in this parliament. John Howard campaigned in 2007 in favour of an ETS as a result of the work that was done in the Shergold report. Labor also campaigned for election in 2007 on an ETS. We did so because we understand that it is the power of the market that can drive change in our economy. The alternative plan, the command-style economy plan of the so-called direct action plan, simply won't be enough. Earlier this year, Senate officials told a Senate Estimates Committee hearing that the Coalition's carbon farming initiative would reduce carbon emissions by just fewer than 4 million tonnes. That's if it's all put into place. The Coalition claims that it will reduce emissions by 20 times this amount. Based on CSIRO research, the Coalition would have to utilise 2/3 of the Australian landmass to achieve the emissions reduction targets they say they support. So let's have none of this nonsense that we've heard opposite about them wanting to get rid of the price on carbon. Indeed, under the legislation that's before this House, the price on carbon will continue up until the 1st of July next year. If they were fair income at all, they would move that once this legislation is carried, then the carbon price would go. But they're not fair income. It's all about politics, as it always has been from those opposite. The Carbon Pollution Reduction Scheme, which we attempted to implement after our election in 2007, consistent with the mandate that was given not just by the Labor government but by the coalition opposition, was designed as a market-based solution. Indeed, Malcolm Turnbull remains a supporter of that position because he knows that the so-called direct action plan is a farce, and he said so very clearly. Indeed, it's not just the coalition, though, who bear some responsibility for walking away from action needed for this and future generations. If the 5 Australian Green senators had got up off their butt and walked across the chamber to vote for action on climate change with the Labor senators and the 2 Liberal senators who had courage in December 2009, we would have had a price on carbon implemented through legislation then. And today it would have been accepted as a consensus in this parliament. What we have now is that in the last term we were able to pass legislation for an emissions trading scheme with a fixed price until the 1st of July 2015. Earlier this year, when Kevin Rudd returned as the Prime Minister and I was Deputy Prime Minister, we committed to the abolition of the carbon tax and a move to emissions trading from the 1st of July 2014, embracing the market, the power of the market, in order to drive that change through the economy. Now, that is the position that Labor took to the election, and it is the position that we hold to today. And yet those opposite are not only sceptics when it comes to climate change, they are also market sceptics. Now, that is absolutely extraordinary. From time to time, the Liberal Party likes to talk about the power of the market. But on this critical issue, with such serious implications for our economy, for employment, for our environment, then the Labor Party prefers, instead of using the market-based mechanism to drive that change through the economy, prefers to subsidise the big polluters. It's a pay polluters scheme that they want. And how does that money, the billions of dollars that is going to be used to subsidise the big polluters, where does it come from? It comes from taxpayers. So what they want to do is slug ordinary Australian working families in order to subsidise the big polluters. That is their plan, rather than embracing the need for a price signal, one that's understood by the business community and one that would put in place a driver of that change through the economy. Now, those opposite pretend that they have a mandate for this and that somehow we should just agree with their position. Well, I say this to them, that we were elected in 2007 with support for an emissions trading scheme that they were also elected upon, and yet they walked away from that commitment. Yesterday, thousands of Australians marched and demonstrated their desire for action on climate change. Fair Australians who have looked at the science and considered the issues know that our responsibility to this and future generations requires more than just mitigation. They know that taking action to prevent dangerous climate change is far preferable than spending money to alleviate the result of climate change. Common sense tells you that that is the case. This is a fundamental issue. It's a fundamental issue between a political party that understands our responsibility to the future, our responsibility to look ahead, our responsibility to prepare for the change that is required, and those opposite who say that there is a cost to carbon pollution, but we'll pass that on to future generations. It is reminiscent of those in earlier times in our great nation who built the industrial warehouses and factories alongside rivers. And why did they do that in our capital and regional cities? They did that because if the pollution from the sugar mill in my electorate on the Cooks River expunged its waste into the river, then it was someone else's problem. They passed on the cost to what is now this generation, whereby those river systems, whether it be Sydney Harbour or the Cooks River or right around our great nation, we see the impact that it had. The impact that said, we will not worry about waste and externalities, to put it in economic terms. We will just pass that on to future generations. That is exactly what the Coalition would have us do when it comes to carbon pollution. There is a cost to carbon pollution, and we need to accept our responsibility because, not out of any bleeding heart position, but because we know that the cost of acting will be far, far cheaper if we act now. Now, during the 43rd Parliament, the Leader of the Opposition at the time, the now Prime Minister, sought power with the political strategy of just being negative. He just said, we'll oppose everything. In the hung Parliament, Mr Abbott was so desperate to create the appearance of chaos that he refused to back anything put forward by our side of politics. The problem with that is that you now have an incoming government that does not have a plan for the future. It's just what they're against. So all of their measures, repealing the price on carbon, repealing the minerals resource rent tax, stopping various infrastructure projects going forward, there is nothing positive. And it struck me when the Governor-General gave the speech to the opening of Parliament last week, that this is a government based upon what it's against, not what it's for. Now, government requires actual solutions. It requires something more than just being negative. According to the scientists across the nation, we know that when it comes to climate change, we need a positive solution, a solution that understands we must be part of international action, yes, but we also have a responsibility as the highest per capita emitter in the world to take action ourselves. And that is why I support Labor's position of moving from the fixed price on carbon to a flexible price mechanism through the emissions trading scheme.